So before we get started, I do want to note that as the council has been really busy last week adopting the Council of Government housing targets, revised housing targets, today we have introduced this particular resolution on economic development that does take into consideration these housing targets as well. We've also been working very hard on our racial equity and social justice legislation that includes a very big component of land use and how to make sure that we are constantly looking at it through that lens. This particular overview and many of the ones to come, we will be going through it with that in mind. And so it's very exciting that as we now take on these types of land use decisions, that we can have these frameworks so that we can, truly be able to realize many of these targets. So I am very excited about that sort of new angle to everything that we do, and really do want to also express my appreciation to both, Casey Anderson and Wen Wright for being leaders regionally and putting us on the map, if you will, when it comes to all of these kinds of innovative ways of approaching land use within the lens of, economic development, racial equity, social justice, et cetera. It's a very exciting time. Let's see, Councilmember Reamer, do you have any opening remarks since this is in your committee before we get going?
Look forward to taking up this plan. When I first got involved in Montgomery County politics, I remember the war over the Forest Glen Metro development and the possibility of a pedestrian tunnel. So I am really pleased that we are now at the point of enacting a vision that might make it possible. And I think you can see the change in the county's politics over time. I think this has been a much more, collaborative and supportive environment to be working in. So I'm excited about this plan. I think it looks terrific. I'm sure there'll be some issues that we'll need to work out, but this is a great plan. Look forward to the public hearing tonight.
All right, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. And thank you, Council President Navarro. I really appreciate your leadership at COG in getting the housing targets adopted as official county policy. That is extremely helpful in our work, and I think it's fantastic that as Councilman Reamer has alluded to the fact that I think there's an emerging consensus that we have a serious housing shortage that needs to be addressed. And that really dovetails with what I wanted to say about this plan, that it is an opportunity to create housing at Metro. When the Metro system was developed, many Metro stations were not really conceived with the idea that they would be a center of transit-oriented development. And it's not just the end-of-the-line stations like Shady Grove and Greenbelt that have over time evolved to be something more than just a place at the end of the line for commuters to park, but even some of the closer-in stations, as the council recognized last year in the Grosvenor Master Plan, that's a really important opportunity to create more housing closer in and not simply a place to put another parking garage. I would say that Forest Glen presents a similar opportunity, not only to create more housing, but also to create some limited retail at the Metro, which I think is something that neighborhood has wanted for a long time. It's sort of in a no man's land between downtown Silver Spring and downtown Wheaton as far as retail is concerned. I know many of the people who have lived in that neighborhood for a long time look forward to the possibility of getting perhaps a coffee shop or some other retail that would serve them in their neighborhood. And for that reason, I think it's extremely important that we try to maximize the opportunity. We've recommended 120-foot heights right at the Metro station. That's very modest compared to other Metro stations in the county, and it's comparable actually to the heights that were approved by the council at Purple Line stations, including Chevy Chase Lake, which I think is similar in some ways, or at Long Branch. So I hope that you'll agree that 120 feet is not only a reasonable height in terms of its relationship to the existing development there, but it's also important to maximize the opportunity that retail and some of the other amenities that the existing community is looking for have a chance of succeeding. The other thing I wanted to touch on briefly is transportation. I think I'm exceptionally proud of our staff, Katie Mansorini, who's come up with, I think, a really innovative idea for helping to relieve congestion at the Beltway interchange on Georgia Avenue, which is an interchange I have to deal with just about every day of my life. I think that there are other concepts in this plan attempting to establish, fill in a little bit more of the street grid to create more opportunities for people to get around without getting on and off Georgia Avenue directly, are also really exciting ideas in this plan that I hope will meet with your approval. And again, trying to focus on not only transit-oriented development, but also walkable communities, Vision Zero, safety, and the attractiveness of this thoroughfare, Georgia Avenue, which has for too long really been a traffic sewer that carries cars but doesn't really have much to do in a positive way with bringing up the community, the quality of commercial and residential development. And this plan tries to turn the page on that and encourage the state to make some investments that will really improve the quality of life and quality of place all in up and down this corridor. So I'm very excited about this plan. I'm proud of the work the staff did, and look forward to working on this with you.
All right, so what's next?
Hi, Melissa Williams for the record. So now I'm going to go and provide an overview of the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills Planning Board Draft Sector Plan. So first, you can take a look at the plan boundary. So the study area boundary is shown in red, and you can see that it's a much larger area. If you look at that gray hash mark, that's essentially running the length of Georgia Avenue between Dennis Avenue and Spring Street, 1 block east or west. That's essentially the sector plan area. And so what we have in that area is essentially the bulk of the multifamily housing within the study area that's on Georgia Avenue. We also have the Montgomery Hills Commercial District. We have the Beltway. We have the Forest Glen Metro Station, and then we have several pieces of several parks and open space. And so all of those were taken into consideration as we developed themes and recommendations for the plan. So quickly to go through the demographics. Right now, what we're talking about is a relatively mature community. If you look at the majority right now are adults aged 45 to 64, but we do have a lot of young families that are moving into the area. Its majority is non-Hispanic white, but we also have an existing Spanish-speaking population. And so as a part of our outreach into the plan area, we tried to make sure that we provided opportunities for everyone that lives, works, and plays in the area to participate. The housing inventory, the bulk of the homes in the study area are detached single-family housing. We do have a large number of multifamily housing. The bulk of those are located in the Forest Glen area, and so that's the area that's above the Beltway, but also closest in proximity to the existing Forest Glen Metro Station. Now, when you start to look at kind of the non-residential space and uses, the biggest activity center right now is the hospital. So the hospital is not within the sector plan boundary, but they are within the study area. And so we did take that into consideration when we were looking at opportunities, particularly in terms of transportation and infrastructure improvements. But when you look at the other kind of commercial and non-residential uses along the corridor, you start to see that there's a lot of service-oriented retail. The bulk of that is located within the Montgomery Hills Commercial District. And so it's older. They're located in older buildings and smaller footprints, but there was still opportunity there. And so as we discussed the land use and zoning recommendations, you'll see where staff was able to identify places where we thought either change or reinvestment actually made sense. And so in terms of jobs and industry, as to be expected, the largest employer is the Holy Cross Hospital and all of their affiliates. We also have a number of medical office parks in the area, and they're all clustered, particularly around the Dennis Avenue area. But then we also have these top 5 employers. So they're not necessarily affiliated with the hospital, but we have Regency Healthcare, we have Snyder's Superfoods, which I'm sure you heard a lot about. We have the Montgomery Hills Car Wash, and then we also have the Maxim Healthcare and Holy Cross Private Home. So when we reached out to the community, we were looking at dynamic ways that we could reach out. And so the one campaign that we came up with was the idea of an interactive text me back system. And essentially what we did is we placed signs along the corridor, including bus stops and inside the actual metro station, where we asked a series of questions. This is an example of one of the questions that we asked, and it was, what do you love about your community? These signs were in both English and Spanish. There was a phone number that was given where not only could they provide a response via text, but it also pinpointed on a map exactly where the text came from. So we could actually see kind of which signs were generating the most activity, and then they were also able to leave general comments. And so if you look at this map, you can see that the bulk of the comments centered around the Beltway, the Montgomery Hills area, but it was really primarily kind of the Beltway and the metro station. And most of the comments that we received actually dealt with issues relating to connectivity, mobility, and kind of other things that would be addressed by Vision Zero. And so we have the chicken must go, right? So, the chicken is gone now. So I'm not sure if this turned the tide on the chicken, but the chicken is no longer with us. So we encouraged everyone to make good use of social media. So we have existing accounts for Montgomery Planning, and those are Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then we had that virtual map, which I just showed an image of. And so that's our MC React map, and that map actually moves. As we move from one plan to the next, the focus area of that map moves. But you can still go back and see those existing comments that related to this particular sector plan. And we created a hashtag for this plan, which was Georgia Ave Connects. So taking all of the comments that we received through the community meetings and the social media responses, we came up with a plan vision. And so that vision, and I'm going to read this because I think it's important. It was utilizing the themes of reconnect, reinvest, and reimagine. The Forest Glen Montgomery Hills Sector Plan offers recommendations that encourage equitable, attractive development, provide for housing choices at all economic levels, and improve connectivity, enhance ecological functions and open space. And so we knew that the county was actually working on social equity themes and ideas, and we were a little bit ahead of that. But what we did is we tried to look at what other communities had done and look at some of the language that we saw in other plans that we felt related to what we were hearing from this particular community, and incorporate that into the plan vision and to the 3 themes for the master plan. So the plan purpose, when it was all said and done, what came out of this is that this plan is primarily driven by infrastructure projects. So that means these are public dollars that are actively driving this plan forward. And this plan hopes to capitalize or leverage that investment. And so the 4 projects that were kind of the primary drivers or the purpose of this plan were the SHA, Comprehensive Study and Redesign of Georgia Avenue. And so that's that area within Montgomery Hills where we're talking about reconfiguring Georgia Avenue so that it improves access and connectivity for all modes of transportation. And we looked at the WMATA. So WMATA came to us early on, and they were looking at the potential of redevelopment at the Forest Glen Metro Station. And so they're embarking on a feasibility study of redevelopment, and they wanted staff to work with them to determine what was the highest and best use for the land, and if it turned out that it was residential or commercial, what type of densities would be needed there in order to make it most attractive for redevelopment, but also provide for much needed amenities, the things that not just the county needed to see, but also what the community needed to see in order to be supportive of development at that location. we have the approval, the approved grade separated passageway. And so we tried to make sure that we kept saying passageway, not tunnel, because we were told early on by the community that they did not like the idea of it being called a tunnel. And that's at Georgia Avenue and Forest Glen Road. And then we have the Georgia Avenue South Bus Rapid Transit, and that was a mode of transportation that was included in the approved and adopted countywide transit corridors plan. So now I'm going to turn it over to Katie Mincarini, and she's going to talk to you about the transportation infrastructure improvements.
So to start, I have this slide that was presented by M.SHA to the board in March, and it reflects the final alignment that was ultimately approved by Federal Highway Administration in September of this year. So I'm just going to cover the highlights of this because this is part of what's really driving our project, and we're confirming this as a short-term recommendation in our plan. So the first is the inside lanes on Maryland 97, Georgia Avenue, will be narrowed to 10-foot lanes to slow traffic and reduce impacts. This aligns with our Vision Zero initiative and our own urban road code. Fantastic. The existing reversible lane along Georgia Avenue will be replaced with a raised median. That means it will have 4 lanes traveling southbound permanently and 3 lanes northbound. Left turn lanes will be added to Georgia Avenue at Forest Glen Road and Flora Lane, and to northbound Georgia Avenue at Seminary Place. As you guys are probably familiar, between 16th Street and Tilton Drive, that's a very large span, it's the entire part of this project, there are no left turns in the peak hours, so that's a big change. The I-95 eastbound inner loop ramp to northbound Georgia Avenue will be removed. That's a big change. And the reason why this is important, and we go into it more detail in this presentation, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it takes out a critical weaving juncture, which is a big safety issue for our motorists. All of I-95 eastbound traffic in Maryland 97, therefore, will be exiting at the southbound ramp that exists today. It will just be widened. More importantly, we have the pedestrian bicyclist improvements, which was the whole catalyst for this project in the first place. So to go over those, a 2-way protected bike lane will be constructed on the west side of Georgia Avenue between 16th Street and the existing bicycle pedestrian bridge along I-495, so that connects to existing infrastructure that's heavily used. That also means the elimination of the slip lane southbound for 16th Street, which will be realigned to the northbound existing alignment of 16th Street. A pedestrian crossing and a new traffic signal will be located at Flora Lane to improve connectivity between residents and local businesses, and this also shortens the crossing distance between existing protected crossings. And then finally, sidewalks compliant with ADA, or American with Disabilities Act, will be provided on both sides of Georgia Avenue, hopefully with some extra buffer distance as well. So that's what we're looking for.
Okay, and as I mentioned, WMATA approached us about their feasibility study. So what you see in this image is the Forest Glen Metro Station parking lot, and then there's a smaller parcel that is the existing entrance today to the metro station. And so that's roughly 8.5 acres right on top of the metro. And so I think it's important to note that for WMATA, they're not only looking for an opportunity to have investment at this location, they're also looking for increased ridership. And so that's something that when they presented to the planning board, they made it very clear that their goal is to get at least an additional 500 or so riders out of whatever development happens at this station.
Okay. Another major infrastructure project that is a big part of this plan, and you guys are familiar with, I'm sure, is the Forest Glen Passageway. We are confirming that alignment. It works great. We did get some feedback from the community, however, that this could be further improved. And so we're making some recommendations in the plan that I want to bring to your attention. Specifically on the northwest corner, if you live on that side of Georgia Avenue, if you have any sort of mobility assistance device that you're reliant on, whether it's a stroller or some sort of a wheelchair or a walker, you have to go pretty far west, in fact, off of this graphic to get into the bus loop, and that's your way in. So one of the things that the plan has recommended is 2 potential locations for elevators that would reduce that distance. So one would be at the northwest corner shown in blue here that's close to the intersection. If for some reason there's infrastructure for the station that makes that impossible, another recommendation is to consider an elevator just west where the orange arrow is shown, and that might be as part of the redevelopment that WMATA is doing already. And so we just want to reduce that walking distance as best we can. Other things that I want to point out as well, the team wants to emphasize that in addition to this tunnel, there are surface improvements that are recommended as part of this plan. Some folks may not want to go into a subgrade crossing, and that's fine. So we're recommending tightening up the curb radii to slow cars that are turning, leading pedestrian intervals at the signals to give pedestrians a bit of a head start when they're entering the intersection, pedestrian refuge at all crossings. Today we have some small ones at Forest Glen, but they would really be better served also on Georgia Avenue as well. Bike boxes at Forest Glen from both approaches, and wider sidewalks and buffers that would continue the recommendations from the Montgomery Hills area. Okay, thank you. As Ms. Williams mentioned before, we are confirming the recommendations for the bus rapid transit south. This is number 2 of the, I think, 10 corridors that are identified in the CTC plan. The big things that we need to point out here is that our plan area covers a fair amount of this. So from Spring Street all the way up to 16th Street, we're confirming the recommendations for dedicated lanes for buses in the long-term alignment. And then from 16th Street north all the way past the study area into Wheaton, mixed traffic. We are also confirming the recommended stops at Seminary Road in Montgomery Hills, Forest Glen Metro Station, as well as Dexter Avenue. And this plan introduces a new stop at Dennis Avenue, which is where the medical office buildings are at the northernmost terminus of the plan. Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to mention that Commissioner Varma is here, and it's always great to have other members of the planning board come out to participate, but I also want to mention this because, as you know, Parthop spent quite a lot of time before he was on the planning board advocating in his community for this, so it's fantastic that he's going to see this to its completion.
Yeah, I was going to acknowledge his presence and say that perhaps he had a little bit of familiarity with this particular plan. So, just a little.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, we established 3 themes, or we proposed 3 themes for the plan, and that was reconnect, reimagine, and reinvest. And so that's essentially reconnect, which was restoring healthy relationships, reimagine, which is thinking about familiar places with new ideas, and then reinvest. And that was the big one that the community wanted to see, was increasing the value. And we looked at monetary and societal of community places for an enhanced experience. And so the reconnect primarily dealt with a lot of the transportation recommendations. And so I'm going to turn this back over to Katie to go through.
So literally reconnecting. One of the charges that we were given both from the community and from our leadership was that we wanted to find out ways that we could better establish a grid on either side of Georgia Avenue. As our planning board chair explained, Georgia Avenue is kind of a through movement for a lot of the traffic. We've done some additional analysis we're happy to share with you, that most of the traffic is originating from outside this area. And that's fine, but that means that when you have local trips from maybe you're going neighbor to neighbor or going to the hospital or going to retail, it makes it very difficult to rely on Georgia Avenue. And so if we could find ways that people could just use local roads, that's our goal. So we found 2 opportunities, and both are dependent on redevelopment. So the first is the left side, which is showing Woodland Drive, which is on the east side of Georgia Avenue towards the north side of our plan in Forest Glen. Right now it terminates right about behind the private school at Medical Park Drive, and there is a grade differential there. But the bicycle master plan already recommends a breezeway route along this as well, so we would be confirming that recommendation. And that is intended to connect all the way south to Silver Spring, north to Glenmont. So this is something that's really aligned with some other plans that have already been approved. All right, moving further south onto the right side of the slide, we have some recommended proposed alignments for the area that is in the Montgomery Hills Shopping Center on the west side. So should the shopping centers redevelop, we wanted to say that there was interest in having roads that were built there to make travel on that west side easier. So you see B2, 3, and 4, which would align with Flora Lane, which is already a project that is being proposed by the state, and then White Oak Drive, and then further south connecting making a parallel route to Georgia Avenue that would connect to Seminary Road. This is something I know we've gotten a lot of feedback about, and so we look forward to working on this with you to make it the best that it can be. And then finally, we kind of mentioned this a little bit with the state highway project. Vision Zero was very much in the lens that we took for this plan. We wanted to figure out how we can make it safer for all modes. And one way that we've learned from previous plans is that crossing distance between protected crossings or protected intersections is important, especially when we have destinations on either side. So we, in conjunction with the community, identified 12 new locations where we think protected crossings could work. And I think it's important to emphasize that we're saying protected crossings because we have a very large toolbox here to work with MCDOT about what this could be. So this could be as something as simple as a four-way stop or a rapid flashing beacon, or as intense as a brand new signal. And so we're just identifying the locations where we think they would be strategic, and we look forward to working with MCDOT towards implementation. The last part, and I owe this to a community member who we worked with very closely, I want to make sure that it's clear that the recommended protected crossing treatment at Luzerne Avenue and Georgia Avenue be a bike and pedestrian crossing only, not for motorists, and that's why it has a little bit of a different symbology. All right. As we talked about before, this bears a little bit more discussion, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. This slide is showing you what the Beltway interchange looks like today. So we have the two loops that are on the east side and the one on the west side. And this plan includes recommendations for both the short and long term. The short-term recommendation, shown on the next slide, is already confirmed with the SHA project. So we're all on the same page here. We agree that this makes a lot of sense. So to summarize what this recommendation includes is that we would, if you're traveling northbound, maintain the eastbound on-ramp as it is today, but eliminate the southeast inner loop off-ramp so that we can remove that conflict as you're trying to travel north to get onto the westbound loop. So that way we don't have people trying to get on the Beltway as people are trying to get off the Beltway at the same time. Everyone's accelerating and it's kind of a mess. SHA agreed, and they agreed that it would make sense to then funnel inner loop, thank you, perfect, that's great, inner loop off-ramp traffic to where we already have southbound coming off. And our recommendation is that we add just one extra lane, make it 2 lanes northbound that are already that would be controlled by a signal that exists today, and then a free flow southbound. Now, in the long term, we've certainly talked a little bit about the Governor's Managed Lanes project. And the reason why that's relevant is that this is a very large project and would probably only come about if that were to happen. And so we wanted to think strategically, when projects like that happen, what could we take advantage for ourselves? How can we improve this area further when we probably couldn't in other circumstances? And so the transportation team thought of the Diverging Diamond Interchange, of which there is a partial one in Maryland already, and these are popping up all over the country. And what this does is it approaches the lane distribution so that it's safer and also just more intuitive. So if you're going to go eastbound on the Beltway, you go in the right lane. If you want to go west, you go left. And if you want to keep going straight, you just stay in the middle. And this is all controlled with lights and pavement markings to make it very clear. And it just gives you a lot more room to wiggle and merge and make your decision on where you want to go. So this is the treatment that we recommend in the long term. I want to be clear, the plan says that our goals here are to first improve safety, second, address traffic flow and the queues and the spillback. So if, say, this doesn't get implemented in the horizon year of the plan and something better comes along, we're open to it. We just want to make sure that we thought this through and could find one treatment at least that could achieve those goals. Okay. That's it.
Okay, and so in the Reimagine section, this is where we talk about those other sections of the plan. So it's land use, urban design, historic preservation, environment, parks, trails, and open space. So in the land use and zoning, the first thing I wanted to show was the recommended land use and zoning maps. And so what we're seeing is that for the most part, the land uses remain the same. We do have places where we've introduced mixed-use development, and those are primarily within the Forest Glen area. And so specifically, we're talking about the properties that are nearest to the Forest Glen Metro Station, and then also we have these properties here. These are the Dennis Avenue Medical. It's titled the Dennis Avenue Medical Cluster in the plan. And essentially what we had there were a large number of properties that were operating under a special exception in an R60 zone. And we were approached early on by one of the property owners. They wanted some relief from the special exception so that they could address some of their parking challenges and also have small kind of local serving commercial uses. There was specifically something as simple as a coffee shop so that the patrons that are using the medical offices would have some place to wait while they're waiting on their services. And so you can see those changes are reflected in the land use and zoning section. I'm sorry, in the zoning maps. And then when we get to the Montgomery Hills commercial area, we did have to address some residual impact from the countywide zoning zoning code rewrite. And so what we ended up with were there were a few properties that were left as non-conforming as they moved from a strictly commercial zone into a mixed-use zone. And so we did make recommendations primarily to bring those properties into conformance. And so you see the bulk of those are highlighted here in this small box. So while we were looking at the land use and zoning recommendations, we were also trying to identify opportunities. And so while the map shows 17 distinct opportunities within the planned area, there are really only 4 that we think are kind of primary. And primary is based on more likely to happen in the short or shorter term. And these are essentially the ones that are driven most directly by the public infrastructure improvements. And so we have sites 6 and 7. And so site 6 is the Forest Glen Metro Station parking lot, and then site 7 is the Forest Glen Medical Center. So those are both tied to the Forest Glen Metro Station, and they represent opportunities for us to have density where it makes sense and to also be able to provide better amenities by providing for higher densities and higher FARs. And so on both of those sites, we gave them a 2.5 FAR with maximum flexibility and a maximum height of 120 feet. We have a very similar recommendation that was made on Site 9, and that is the existing Seminary Place Shopping Center. And so that's shown here. That is the largest opportunity within the Montgomery Hills Commercial District. It's also a property that that is going to be somewhat impacted by the reconfiguration of Georgia Avenue. And it's also a place where we thought that if and when the BRT was implemented, it would be most logical to have a BRT station as a part of any development or as close as possible to any development on that site. And then finally, we have site number 15. And so that is shown here. And if you're familiar with the area, what we're talking about is that large forested area at the intersection of Georgia Avenue and 16th Street. And so right now, it's essentially kind of a remnant, untamed forest. And this property would be available if and when the Georgia Avenue reconfiguration happens. And so the realignment of 16th Street could provide an opportunity here. So this would go away, and we could essentially have all of this parcel, which is roughly 3.8 acres, could provide some sort of passive or active recreational use. There's a parks recommendation here to have an urban Urban Recreational Park. Sorry, I had to get the correct name. The Urban Recreational Park. I think it's important to note that there is also there's also a need for SHA right now. They're saying they may need it for stormwater mitigation, but our Parks Department is working very closely with them to come up with language that makes sense or to come up with a way to do both things at that site. And so urban design was something that was important because we have this highway that's essentially bisecting single-family residential neighborhoods, and then we have very shallow, in some places, commercial lots that are providing a buffer between Georgia Avenue and these single-family neighborhoods. What we heard from the community over and over was to make sure that we address the existing uses that they may not feel that they are compatible, and that any new development provide for compatibility. And so we attempted to do that in the plan with language, and then we also provided an illustration of what could happen in terms of making sure that we have compatible development. And so this was specifically the Forest Glen Medical Center. And as I stated before, we're talking about a 2.5 FAR with a height of 120 feet. And if you look at the image to the far left, what you're seeing is an illustrative view of that development. And this is simply applying the compatibility requirements of the CRT zone. So it's not kind of amping it up or adding anything in addition. It's literally saying doing exactly what the zone tells them to do if they redevelop the site. And so you see that we have the step downs, we have the bulk of the development could be centered right along Georgia Avenue. And then if you look to the far right, this is a view from the existing single-family neighborhood. And you see that we could essentially wrap the rear of that development with a townhome, style development, or a missing middle style development, so to speak. And it provides what we think is an adequate transition. And so we did show this we showed this at a planning board session, and the community, for the most part, seemed to be responsive to this. It didn't give them the heartburn that they thought they were going to have with this development. So we took that as a positive, but it doesn't necessarily have to end up like this. We did say this is an illustrative, so they could actually come up with something that actually works better for the community. And so this is an example. Once again, this is a street view. This is Georgia Avenue, and this is that Forest Glen Medical Center. And so this is showing how, if all of the streetscape improvements that are recommended in the plan and the new development is put into place, so comprehensively, this is what Georgia Avenue could look like, and this is right at Forest Glen Road and Georgia Avenue. So historic preservation. We don't have specific historic preservation recommendations. We didn't necessarily designate anything in this plan, but we did acknowledge that there's the potential for designation. And so there were quite a few sites in the area that we thought the historic preservation staff may need to take a look at in the future. And so those include the Montgomery Hill Shopping Center. We have 2 churches, which is the Calvary Evangelical Lutheran Church, and then Grace Episcopal Church and Cemetery, Prestige Exceptional Fabric Care, and Americana Finmark. And then we also looked for an opportunity to integrate signage and markers and public art that were reflective of the history of the community. And so there is a very rich history in both the Forest Glen and Montgomery Hills area that we felt should be celebrated. As we talk about environment, this quarter, much like many quarters in Montgomery County, has a great degree of impervious surfaces. And so one of the recommendations that came out looked at ways to improve or increase the green cover. And so I'm not going to go through the entire recommendation, but this is very similar to what you saw in a previous master plan, and it looked at ways to address green cover specifically on some of the larger sites while still providing an opportunity for smaller parcels to redevelop. And parks, trails, and open space. And so this map, essentially, this is our study area here. And while you can see that there are a large number of parks around the study area, when you start to talk about the neighborhoods, particularly the single family and the multifamily neighborhoods that are within that boundary, you start to see that most of the parks are on the edges. And even where there are parks that are within close proximity, you have to deal with Georgia Avenue. And so the one thing that we kept hearing was that Georgia Avenue and Forest Glen Road essentially isolated some of these communities from the existing public amenities. And they wanted to make sure that staff understood that, and we made recommendations in the plan that had an equitable distribution of amenities. And so we ended up making, and I want to say there's either 7 or 8 new recommended parks and open space recommendations, and they're scattered throughout the planned area along the corridor, with the largest recommendation being the reuse of that remnant parcel from the SHA right-of-way. And so I walked you through that, so we don't necessarily have to go through that again, but it does have a great deal of potential. We can have both passive and active recreation, community gardens, play fields, dog parks, skate parks. Essentially, we felt that because it's such a large parcel, that it provided an opportunity to essentially meet that checklist that we typically get from communities when they're looking for kind of new amenities that are associated with parks in the plans. So the reinvestment, we looked at housing, community facilities, and public schools in the reinvestment section. And for housing, this was an opportunity, as Chairman Anderson stated, to get not only get additional affordable housing, but to also get it in the right places. And so specifically, we were looking at a recommendation for a minimum of 15%, and these are strategically located next to the Forest Glen Metro Station. And so that's the existing Forest Glen parking lot, the Forest Glen Apartments, which is essentially ahead of the plan. That's an MHP property. They have an approved local map amendment that they're actually going to be moving forward with their development. And then we also have the Forest Glen medical offices. And then we also looked at preserving the existing affordable housing where possible. And so those parcels are here, and that's the Belvedere Apartments and then the Fields of Silver Spring. And so in one case, we had a property owner that felt good, that felt okay with their existing recommendation on their site. And then in the other parcel, that's a tax credit project. And so they have low-income housing tax credits on site that extend beyond the life or the horizon of the plan. And so we did not make recommendations there. But what we did see is that even without including those two parcels, that just because we're putting a mixed-use zone in places where it wasn't before, that those are opportunities for housing. And we essentially ended up with, if every single thing throughout the plan area maxed out their development, we would be talking about 2,200 additional multifamily units. And so that does require everything to redevelop along the corridor. And so for our community facilities, we had childcare recommendations, and so once again, and also a recommendation for a satellite library or a kiosk at the metro station. And so those two recommendations were located right at the Forest Glen Metro Station, because we believe that because these are the places where we're encouraging the most density and they're transit accessible, that both of those recommendations made sense there. And this is just showing you our existing and projected school enrollment based on the potential redevelopment in the area. And finally, I'm going to go quickly through implementation. And so, as I stated with our zoning, we were essentially addressing non-conforming properties. We were hoping to maximize the potential along the corridor. We were providing relief from previous special exceptions and introducing a mix of uses where appropriate. We also updated our road design standards, and so we were looking to apply those to multimodal corridors, specifically along Georgia Avenue, hoping for reduction in speeds and lane widths, and improving pedestrian, cyclist, and transit infrastructure. We have the bicycle pedestrian priority area, and so right now there are two currently in the area. We have the Montgomery Hills and Forest Glen. The recommendation is to merge the two and implement ADA compliant retrofit of existing and master plan sidewalks and crossings. And we have our extensive capital improvements program. So you're going to see that there were a total of 32 different projects that were noted on the CIP, and the majority of those are related to transportation infrastructure, and we also have quite a few of parks and open space recommendations. And then finally, small business support. And so when we were looking at this, the Montgomery Hills Commercial District is the existing kind of main street or downtown for the planned area. And it's weathered the storm. It's starting to show its age, but it's still strong. There's still some very strong businesses there. And we had initially, when the plan started, we actually had a consultant that went out and spoke to both the businesses and the property owners, and they came back to us and gave us some information that we thought was useful. And the one thing that they recommended, which is something that we see in all of our master plans, is technical assistance and financial assistance. And so that's something that we were expecting to hear that. Internally, our staff took another look at it, and we found that there were opportunities for targeted programming. And so we have a recommendation in the plan that the area be designated, specifically Montgomery Hills, be designated to receive MCEDC Small Business Impact Funds, and we believe that that could be triggered based on the SHA reconfiguration of Georgia Avenue. And then we also had our historic preservation staff look at the area, because a large number of the sites that could potentially be designated as historic are located in Montgomery Hills, and they felt that this was a prime candidate for the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Main Street program. And so looking at that recommendation, we did reach out to the Tacoma Park Main Street program to see what that program manager felt about the designation. And based on that conversation, we believe that the area did qualify, and so we included that recommendation as well. And where we are right now, this is kind of wrapping up the presentation. We are nearing the kind of the end, but it's also the kind of the longest part of it. And we're here in front of the county executive and county council for review, and then tonight we have the public hearing. And that concludes the presentation from us.
All right. Let's see, Councilmember Reamer.
Great. Well, the good and the bad about the fact that you came early and sat down with me and you gave me a presentation is I got a chance to ask a lot of my questions at that time, which was nice. But I'm enthusiastic about getting this plan done, and I don't have a ton to add today. What are the public lands that are in the plan area?
Hold on, let me go back to a map. Okay, so public land, we have, there's this parcel here, which is Health and Human Services. Were you talking about vacant parcels or just public in general?
Actually, you can say any. Yeah, that'd be
Okay.
fine. Did you zone that for any additional development or housing or?
We actually did. I'll go back to the zoning map because that might be more useful. We had a conversation early on with DGS, and so initially we were going to apply an EOF zone there, and so that was the essentially kind of an employment office zone that wouldn't necessarily allow for housing. I don't think it allows for housing. Yeah, 30% could be housing? Okay. So we initially had an EOF zone that we were applying to this entire parcel here. And so the largest piece here is actually Health and Human Services. And then after a conversation with the planning board and also some input from the community, we ended up changing that to a CRT zone.
Allowing more
And so it allows
flexibility and.
more flexibility and also allows for more housing development there. And so that zone on that parcel, and you cannot read that.
That's
graphic.
okay. Keep going.
Okay, and then we also have the WMATA property, which is these two properties here, which is roughly 8.5 acres. Then there is the park, which is located here, which is owned by Parks. Then if you come all the way down, this is very blurry. You come down here, once you get into Montgomery Hills, we have two PLD lots. So there is one small parcel here, which is lot 48, and then we have this, which is lot 12. And actually, I think this one, go back here. So then you get here, this is essentially the SHA property. And so this did not have a zone on it at all because it's right-of-way, and so we gave it an R60 zone in the plan. Then you come down finally to Spring Street, and you have this parcel, all of this in here. Half of it is actually Health and Human Services. It was a former elementary school. The other half belongs to Parks.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we need to take a look at that and make sure we're getting the most out of the, most value out of the public land for housing and affordable housing.
Okay.
So, we have these pretty ambitious goals about the need for new housing in the county. And so it's hard to control what the private sector is going to do with the shopping centers there. We can only hope.
Yes.
But there may be the ability to control a bit more with our own land, provided the county executive is also willing to participate in that in the short term.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
All right. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. And I want to echo the sentiments that the chair of the Fed Committee made, in that I asked most of my questions during the briefing. So The one question I have for you is a very timely one, given the news that was made earlier this morning regarding the Beltway, and I haven't been able to dive into the details of how that changes, but can you reiterate or be more specific in what parts of this plan are contingent on any changes to the Beltway?
Great question. Thank you for the opportunity to respond. So, in short, nothing depends on it except for the funding mechanism, right? So the diverging diamond interchange, we talked about that because with the Beltway widening project, if that phase were to move forward, it's a very intense project and it's a very expensive project. Rolling something like the diverging diamond into that project suddenly makes it seem like a smaller, more feasible project. But I want to make it very clear that the planned, I mean, we're doing this at concept level, but the planned outline of what would be needed to achieve the diverging diamond is not dependent on the Beltway widening. So it could fit in the space that we have right now. So it's not a footprint issue. It's more of momentum, money, and the opportunity. Everything else about that Beltway widening project does not affect us. And we certainly engage a lot with our community, as a lot of the private properties that would have been affected by the most recent alignment of the Beltway widening project are in our area. I think we were like 40 of 60. So we're very sensitive to that, and so we're not making any sort of judgment call into whether that's a good or bad project. It's just an opportunity that could make one of our projects a little more feasible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad to hear that all of this, including to some level the divergent diamond interchange,
Yes.
can move forward regardless of what happens to the
Yes.
Beltway. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Sure.
Councilman Brunel, sorry.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be brief. I just wanted to, as somebody who was born at Holy Cross, lived off of Dennis Avenue, and currently shops at Snyder's, I know this area very, very well, and really appreciate the efforts that you guys have taken to engage the community, which I think serves as a really strong example of the partnership that will help all of us as we enact these important master plans when people feel like they're part of that process. I guess I just had, and one other just thank you. So we've obviously have had a rash of terrible pedestrian collisions recently, two involving teenagers driving down just on their bikes on Old Georgetown Road. And so I know that you've paid special attention to that in this plan, and just another kudos to you guys for acknowledging that up front and thinking of creative ways of addressing this, because we ultimately do want to build a more walkable and sustainable neighborhood, but if we build it and they come, we have to make sure that everyone is safe despite all of that. And I guess the unknown, of course, here, as has been alluded by my colleagues, is how development will be a partner in this, since we so desperately need our folks to step up to help build out important elements of this plan. So if you could just talk a little bit about how you're engaging the private sector and strategies that you plan on using moving forward to ensure the private element of this public-private partnership is realized.
Okay. And I'll just go back to the opportunities map. And so a lot of, I would say the bulk of the sites that we identified resulted from conversations that we had with the property owners. So this area here, just kind of starting from the top, this area here, we had several conversations. I don't want to assume that there's going to be kind of wholesale redevelopment of that area, but there will be reinvestment. And so for us, we were trying to make sure that even if it was something that wasn't necessarily kind of the building comes down and a new building comes up, that we identified that as a part of the process. So a lot of the changes a lot of the sites that are identified here were actually reinvestment sites, places where property owners were saying, if you fix Georgia Avenue, I am willing to kind of put more money into this property. I'm willing to, go out and potentially seek better tenants or kind of spruce up the building. And so what we were seeing is that the SHA study and the way that it lagged, you started to see the impact of that along the commercial stretch. But quickly, we had these property owners were very excited about being able to do something different inside their existing development. We had this property actually changed hands at the beginning, and it's now owned by Montgomery Housing Partnership. And so they're looking at a mixed-use development there, which is something that's going to increase the amount of affordable units. They're also going to have kind of a mix of use and a mix of incomes. So they're incredibly excited about moving forward. We have this entire area kind of around the metro station. There has been some energy there. I can't speak for what WMATA plans to do with the information that they got out of the plan, but the Forest Glen Medical Center owners, which is property 7, they have been incredibly involved, and they have stayed in touch with us, and you will actually see a sign on their property when you go out on the tour tomorrow. I'm just going to leave it at, we did not put the sign up, but you will see a sign tomorrow. And then we have this parcel here. So parcel 9 is the one that is probably going to happen in phases, because what we're really talking about are 3 property owners, 4 parcels. And so the largest property owner is the Seminary Place Shopping Center. And so they are the ones that right now they're almost fully leased. They've got new businesses that have moved in that they're very excited about. And they are probably going to be the most impacted by, in terms of overall impact, they're going to be the most impacted by the SHA reconfiguration. And so they're definitely going to probably wait to see what happens, but they're staying in contact with us. The car wash and the gas station, that is, what happens there is really up to what the final kind of,
Detailed engineering.
yeah, the final engineering of Georgia Avenue will determine what happens with the car wash and the gas station. But then we also have smaller property owners. We have like Schneider's, which is kind of in here. They've recently come out and said they're excited about an opportunity, and so that's good. We've worked with them from the beginning. They've stayed in contact with us. They never really said that they were going to do something, but we always knew that they were just making sure that they kept their options open. And then we have parcels that we spoke to the property owners. They didn't necessarily have an idea as to what they wanted to do, but the minute the plan got to the point where we put some zoning recommendations down, the parcels went up for sale. So I think what we're seeing is that the community now, they're energized. And I think that's kind of the best that we can hope for at this junction, is that they're energized by the what they see as positive conversations that are happening across kind of all levels of government. They see that SHA and the county and the planning staff are all working together. And so that was something that we heard, is that they see the positivity in the relationships and they feel positive about their future. And so they feel that now this provides an opportunity for them to actually feel comfortable reinvesting their time and their energy and their finances into making sure that their businesses and their properties kind of are reflective of the goals of the sector plan. So I know that was a lot. I hope that answered your question. But I just kind of wanted to get it all out there, because we have had a lot of conversations for the last several years. And I think the entire team feels really good about the work that we did in reaching out to the stakeholders.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for all the work that has gone in. Thank you in particular to Commissioner Verma, who I know has done a lot of work on this, as was noted by Chairman Anderson and by the council president. I know that there's a lot of interest and a lot of excitement about this plan. There's been a lot of resident input, which is terrific. Obviously, there will be plenty of things to work out. We've received some correspondence of general support with some specific tweaks that certain residents in certain communities are looking for, which is all part of what we'll address at the Fed committee, and I look forward to that work. I share the comments that were made earlier of making sure that we're leveraging the public properties that we have as part of the plan to make sure that we are achieving the housing targets that we have now adopted, thanks to the council president's leadership and our economic development goals as well, making sure that we figure out how to really energize this area and community that is so ripe for that type of economic development, that type of housing, and the type of community that we know it could be, and the type of resident activism that is there ready for the changes that are possible. I have a lot of specific questions that we'll get to in the committee session, but I just want to ask a broad question. I mean, this is basically centered around State Highway, as was mentioned earlier, and obviously the safety components, which we don't have to get into now, are extreme and serious, and we need to continue to push on that level. But I'm just, the broader question that I have is, what conversations have you had with State Highway, if any, on the plan? What type of buy-in do they have on the interchanges that we're talking about here, and the general thought process to the transportation planning component of the plan, because that really is basically the skeleton that all of it is based off of?
You are absolutely right. That project is really what launched this plan, is the catalyst for it. So we took that very seriously. We've been meeting with SHA probably on a bi-monthly, or sorry, not bi-monthly, that's a little crazy. We've been meeting on a quarterly basis, and I check in with them every month to see how we're doing. They have been very close in touch with us. We've had meetings with the administrator individually, also with his deputies, and we've also been talking with my peer-to-peer staff just to figure out what do they need to move forward. Is there any case that we can make that helps them move forward with theirs? And I really think what we've been able to help them with is leverage the community engagement. There was a lot of consensus in 2015 for Alternative 5B, and we've just been helping them build that momentum and keep having people emphasize to them and to the governor that this is the alternative that they want, which is why we got the alignment that we did. I continue to talk with them really regularly. They are switching from the planning concept, which is 30% design in December, into detailed engineering. And we already have meetings with the new project manager. He's going to be on the bus tour tomorrow. And we've been continuously talking with them about how we can best serve them. To ask your question, or answer your question about the two interchanges. So one of the members of our transportation team, I cannot take credit for this, came up with the loop ramp removal, and they really said that makes a lot of sense for them. It worked with their traffic modeling as well as ours, because we obviously have two different priorities. They're more focused on the Beltway. We're more focused on Georgia Avenue. Turns out this works for everybody, especially from a safety perspective. So based on our team's recommendation, they've put that into their plan. This wasn't originally part of the Georgia Avenue project. As far as the diverging diamond goes, that was a major change, and basically the feedback we got was, this is nice. Our modeling is kind of far along. It's kind of hard for us to put in, but we don't mind it in concept. And we understand that at least from a conceptual level, it looks like this could work with or without our managed lanes project. Doesn't stop that from coming. So we've been sharing with them all of our ideas, and there are lots of bad ideas that didn't make it this far, and some of that's from their feedback. So we've been working together with them as if they're part of our own team.
Well, we always appreciate you filtering out the bad ideas before it gets to us. You can leave the bad ideas to us.
That's
we
right.
appreciate it.
No, I'm just kidding. But
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Look forward to continuing the conversation in committee and getting to the best outcome possible.
Likewise.
Councilmember Jawando.
Just quickly, I'm not going to ask any questions here today. Great presentation. You can tell you well briefed us all, but good job on that. But look forward to digging in and Fed and getting into the details, and appreciate the group, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Councilmember Hooker.
Same. I just, as the local council member, wanted to extend my thanks again for all the time and effort you put into the work on this and the community outreach. I think, you've really gone above and beyond, and not everybody is happy with every master plan at any time, but I think this is a great work product to put in front of us. And I've heard from a lot of members of the community, and I look forward to hearing from more tonight, but I really appreciate you getting it this far, and I don't have any questions since I asked many in my office. So thanks so much for all your hard work.
I think there is a tiny little bitty sliver in my district, but I wanted to say that I'm also quite impressed. I actually lived near there on Dunkirk Drive, right off of Dennis Avenue, for 10 years, and so this particular plan has really amazing components in it that would be really will enhance that entire area significantly. So I appreciate the thought and all the work that's gone into it thus far. Tonight, we do have about 30 folks that are coming over to share their input and their thoughts on this. So we will be back here at 7:30 p.m. To hear from them, and we'll see where we go with this. Thank you so much.